Welcome, everybody. We'll get started here. Just wanted to thank you all so much for joining Tenbound's Leadership in a Remote World Conference. Just a couple of quick announcements. We ask that you keep your mics muted during the session, and we encourage you to use the Q&A portion of the chat box to send any questions over to Maggie and Kyle. So I'd like to introduce Maggie Crowley and Kyle Bastien from Drift for their presentation on artificial intelligence. What is it, what isn't it, and why it's the future of selling.
All right, thank you, Renee. Welcome, everyone. Like Renee mentioned, my name is Maggie. I'm a Senior Director of Product over here at Drift. And Kyle, who's also here, also works with me at Drift. And we're here to talk about something that I'm sure everyone has heard floating around, and that's AI or artificial intelligence. So I've been building AI-based products for the past couple of years, and my hope today is that Kyle and I can army everyone who's listening with what you need to understand why AI is coming up more and more in the world of sales, what you need to know to be confident talking about it, and how to think about how AI might be able to help you in your day-to-day. So again, like we mentioned, please drop stuff in the chat. Kyle and I are going to make this into a conversation as much as we can as we go. So where I want to start is why is AI such a buzzy topic? Why are we all talking about this? And I really think it comes up because of the change it has already made to our economy and also for the group in the room, right? So the specific potential it has to help sales and marketing teams do their jobs better. It's having a huge impact on the marketing and sales business. There are, 41% of B2B professionals who are using it. And the reason why this is coming up and why this is the case is because AI can help people in sales work more effectively and efficiently. I don't think that there's any reason when AI is available for us to be doing repetitive work. Instead, AI can help reps focus on the hard parts of selling. So in this example, by gathering qualification criteria, we can help buyers get what they need so that you can focus on having conversations that matter with the best leads. And so this is the type of AI can do and why it's having such an impact. And part of what's useful about this is that AI is not only collecting information from buyers like in that example, but it can also be used to pull together a huge variety of data sources to uncover patterns and signals that would be impossible for us to do by hand. And that's information that we can use to understand, who are the right buyers that we want to talk to and how can we be more efficient when we're going out there and doing our day-to-day job. And again, I think this is the type of content that you're probably seeing out there. It sounds really, maybe too good to be true. But what actually is it and why does it matter? And why do we care about it? I think this is the type of stuff that I have heard, in marketing or other companies. And I know, AI is going to change the world. It's this huge, big thing. And I know it can also be really intimidating. I don't have an engineering degree. I'm not a scientist. And it can be hard to ask questions and talk about AI because it can seem really advanced. But luckily, I think there are some simple things you can do to wrap your head around what it is, what it isn't, and to figure out how, I think most importantly, to ask good questions about it. So one way to think about AI is that it's the science of making machines smart. But really, AI is an umbrella term for a bunch of different concepts. And I think it's useful to know that AI is made up of a bunch of different things. So when people say that, they might be referring to any number of things, all of which have slightly different use cases. But at the end of the day, they're all about, how can we solve problems more efficiently? So for example, AI includes machine learning. So to give a very technical definition, this is, computer systems that are able to learn and adapt without following explicit instructions. They use algorithms and statistical models, etc. But I think all we need to know is that machines are learning about stuff based on data. Another thing that you might have heard is deep learning. And so this is a type of machine learning that mimics the way human brains work to process data. You might have heard people say things like supervised learning or unsupervised learning. That's typically something that they would talk about with deep learning. You may have heard people say neural networks, again, another buzzy word. This refers to the algorithms that mimic the human brain that you're using in deep learning. Or maybe people have tossed around, NLP, which is natural language processing. And this is a type of linguistics that's all about helping computers understand text and spoken language. So when someone says AI, there are tons of different things that they could be referring to. And I think rather than getting stuck in the details on, what kind of machine learning someone's talking about, I think it's more helpful to think instead about the use cases for this type of technology, right? Because it doesn't really matter which one of these things that we're talking about, because it's all about, how can we solve a problem with data? And luckily, and more simply, there are two top-level use cases for AI that I think it's helpful for all of us to understand. And the first and most common one is that AI is used within business to reduce costs by automating repetitive, data-driven tasks. Think about, maybe support would be something that you could try to automate. The second use case is AI can be used to drive revenue. So it can, for example, improve our ability to make predictions based on data. So those are two use cases that I think it's helpful to think about AI within the context of sales. And I do think it's also important to be clear that as much as we've been talking about sort of what it can do and the huge impact AI can have, it's not magic. So I think we've all seen these things like deepfake technology, or maybe you've heard of GPT-3 and all this crazy stuff that's happening. And those are examples of early application of new science that's coming out the door. But the AI that we're going to run into in our day-to-day is typically not that kind of thing. And it's stuff that's going to learn, that's not going to be able to learn and then act on its own. Instead, it's algorithms and models that need training data in humans to make it useful. So as much as we want it to be, this mysterious thing that's deciding what to do on its own, that's really not the case. Good application of AI requires humans, it requires a specific use case, and it requires really good training data. And without that, it's going to be really hard to kind of get to this crazy future that we know about. All right. So I think from here, what's important is to understand, how are we going to be able to talk about AI, right? So we know we've heard some of these terms. We know it's having a big impact. We know it's not like the Terminator. So I want to share a couple of tips and tricks for how to talk about AI now that we've had a little bit of grounding in what it is. And I know I said it a couple of times already, but the key is to do a little bit of homework, to spend a little time actually digging in and understanding these concepts, because that's what's going to allow us to have better conversations when AI comes up, because you're going to know, what's being discussed, and you're going to know how to think about the topic, and you're not going to be kind of scared of sounding stupid. I know when I first started in working with AI, Kyle and I were working together, and I spent a lot of time Googling terms just because I didn't sound like an idiot when I was on the phone. All right, so the first place I would start with this is there are some terms that I think you should just have a high level understanding of, or a little bit of familiarity with, so that you're not sort of caught off guard when someone starts to talk about it. These are things like algorithms, different types of automation. We talked about machine learning, deep learning. We also talked about natural language processing and neural networks. Again, it's useful to know these things, or at least kind of have a general sense of them, so that when they come up in conversation, you're not like, oh, I don't know what that is, so I don't want to talk about it. And the most important thing, I think, though, is that all of that depends on the data that you have. So you can understand all these different concepts, but AI is only be as good as the training data that's available to you or to your customers or to whoever you're talking to. So it's useful to know the terms, and to know that the other requirement for AI to be helpful is that there's enough data available to train it. So you need to understand the concepts, you have the data, and those are the two inputs that you're going to need to be successful with AI. But you might be wondering, why does this matter for people who are in sales? And so I think, again, it's important to understand the concepts, but I'm going to get into also why I think it's useful for this space. Because we're really reaching a tipping point where the available technology is getting easier to use and easier to deploy, which means that as more companies are taking advantage of AI to drive more revenue and operate more efficiently, companies who are slow to adopt, I think, are going to get left behind. So it's important for us to understand what the technology is and figure out how we might be able to use it so that we're not the ones who are getting left behind. So within sales, I think what I would do, the first place I would start is always identify the use case that you want to solve with AI. A big thing I want to call out is that AI for AI's sake is bad. and it's going to be expensive, and it's not worth it. Just doing something because it's buzzy or because people are talking about it is not going to get you a good result. So I think a lot about why you want to do something in the first place. So think about what activities do you or your team have that involves data that is repetitive, or maybe you're trying to produce consistent and accurate predictions. Those are the types of things that might be useful to use AI to help with. And then once you have your sort of use case in mind, the next thing I would think about is the outcome. So, okay, you have the problem that you want to solve. Then you have to think about, what do you need to do? What outcome do you want to drive? Maybe it's efficiency. So in that case, I would think about, how much time might you be able to save, and what would that mean for your SDR team's throughput if you were able to automate something that they were doing? Or if revenue is more the thing that you're looking for, think about AI in terms of maybe how many more leads you can qualify, or how many more meetings you can book, or how much higher your conversion rate can be based on the leads that you're collecting. So again, you need to understand basically the concepts. You need to have your use case, and then you need to have an idea of the outcome that you're looking to get. So I'm going to give a specific customer example, the customer that Kyle and I worked with. So Okta, they're a leader in workforce and customer identity and authentication, and they came to us with a challenge. They said, we need to scale sales and marketing to meet an aggressive growth target. And AI wasn't the only thing that we used or that they used, but it was a key component for them, because what we did was we used AI to help handle tasks that they didn't really need to do themselves, which freed up their sales team to focus on working the best leads at the right time. So they weren't burdened by, leads that were sort of messy or unqualified. They only got the good leads, and they could focus on working those leads. And we used AI to deliver sort of a personalized experience for buyers on their website, which allowed us to drive way more pipeline from that channel, increase their conversion rate they were getting from MQL to SQL, for example. So this is one specific thing where they had a use case which they needed to drive more efficiency because they wanted to scale. They knew what they were looking for in terms of the outcome, and then they were able to apply AI to that problem and see that kind of result. And to go a little bit further with Okta, the specific product we were using was Virtual Selling Assistant. And so if we take what we've talked about so far, again, what we did was we used NLP and machine learning, so two concepts, to train a model that can respond to buyers and answer their questions and collect qualifying information. Freeing up those reps, like I mentioned, to have real conversations, wasting less of their time and helping them convert more leads. So again, the use case here was that repetitive qualification. The data that we used to power this were their past conversations that the sales team had. We used that to train the model using NLP and machine learning. So you can kind of see the full loop of how we used those concepts to power this use case for Okta. So that's it, really. That's like the one example of how to talk about AI, how to think about it, some concepts that can be useful within sales organizations. So hopefully, I haven't been looking at the chat, but hopefully, Kyle, we have some questions we can answer.
Yeah, Maggie, I'm going to give you some of my questions first as we get the Q&A fired up with the rest of the group. So, we were talking about this, backstage before the event, and we were talking about how AI technology is virtually ubiquitous in all the B2C apps we use today, from Netflix, recommending our next show, to Peloton recommending the next, course we should take, to Amazon bundling products for us at checkout. We try to buy something, and it's literally in every aspect of our life from a B2C standpoint. But it's still a pretty new concept in the context of B2B buying and selling. Do you want to repeat or tell, let's talk about a little bit around why you think that is, and what B2B has to learn from B2C as it relates to using AI to create better customer experiences.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things you can think about is, the size of the consumer market is huge. And so it might be easier to train up models faster within that space. But I think another thing that I've been thinking about, Kyle, since we were talking is also the comfort level that people have with AI. I think one of the things that we've learned over the course of the last couple of years is, if you're in sales and marketing and you have a specific way you like doing things, maybe if you're a marketer and you're designing your conversation, or, if you're an SDR, exactly what flow it is that you like to have talking to a lead. AI is not going to follow that every single time. It's going to be a little bit different. It's going to be personalized. It's going to respond based on what someone says, which makes people uncomfortable because it's new and it's a little bit scary to trust it. So I think part of the challenge with B2B is also, helping people understand these concepts and get comfortable with them so they can trust that that's good. They're going to do right by their customers. Whereas I think in consumer, TikTok doesn't really care on the margin how it goes for one person.
That makes sense. And it dovetails nicely with the next question we got in the chat from David, who asks, if you're new to implementing AI in your sales process, where should you start in having this conversation internally? And thank you for the question. But I'll also add that, as I've had a lot of conversations with folks about this, organizational readiness is probably one of the biggest barriers to, the underlying point of your question. So thank you for bringing that up. And Maggie, love to hear what you think about that.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, I would say it depends, and this is going to be such a product management answer, which is my background, but it's going to depend on the problem that you want to solve. And I would say, again, it's just because it's buzzy and you think it's interesting is probably not a good time. But I would say if you're running into scaling trouble, or if you have, too many leads and you can work, or maybe your leads aren't high quality, or, there's got to be something happening that you think you can apply this type of technology to. And so whenever that problem comes up, I would say that's the right time about it. I don't know, Kyle, with the sales background, if you agree with that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, my experience has been folks generally don't unpack the technical aspects of AI and the solutions they're presenting, but it's more around building the business case for the resolution of the problem that they have. So that's a great point. I think couching it as a how to something that they already care about rather than a new thing that they need to care about, independent of what they're already working on business, probably starts that conversation. And David has a great follow-up to that, which is to the point you made that the model and the AI is only going to be as effective as the data going in. Not all businesses have a great grip on their data quite yet. And so, do we have to do the question is specifically if you're battling bad data, where should you start? And do we need to, tackle that first before we can start considering AI solutions in our business?
I think it depends on the vendor that you go with. I think not every AI solution is going to require, 3 billion lines of data, right? There's some probably more constrained problems that you could solve. And so I would think about, is there whatever use case that you're looking at, can you tighten it up something a little bit more targeted and then curate some data around that? I think one of the things with AI is that it might just take a little bit of time to hand pick the data that you want to train something on. So it's not uncommon for people to spend some time, getting the training data right first. Or you can, start with something. One of the things that we do at Drift is we might go live a little bit quicker with something that doesn't have a ton of training data, and we'll train it live on conversations that people are having. So it depends on your risk tolerance, depends on the data that you have and the team that's available to you. I think it's another thing I would think about.
Right on. And now we have another question from Aline, who is an SDR, so a practitioner, and asks, for an SDR team, would it be interesting to set a guideline to not do anything AI could do for you? Thinking in terms of creating meaningful outreach, for example. So I think as a rule of thumb, what are the things for SDRs that they should not be doing that AI can be doing for them?
Yeah, another good question. Again, coming very specifically from the product that we're working on, but I think the types of things that we see would be, asking the same questions over and over and over again. That's something that AI could probably do for you. I think what's more interesting is if a customer has a really nuanced question, or they're really engaged and they want to talk about some specific use case that they have. That's the type of thing where I would say focus on those. Don't focus on asking, the same, what's your email, what's your name, all that kind of stuff would be things that AI or chat or some tool could answer for you.
Yeah, and Aline, I'll actually add to that because I do a lot of work setting up AI solutions for SDR teams specifically, and I would generally categorize it in two places, which is one, what's the work that you don't want to do? And as an SDR, that usually means answering questions from existing customers that figured out that they're not getting the attention they want from support. Just say you want to buy something and you'll find yourself talking to a salesperson faster than there. And if we can, address those issues programmatically, especially when it's the kind of thing that we answer with like a canned response anyway from, a support document, that kind of stuff can definitely be automated. And the other thing is the stuff that you would love to be doing more of aren't necessarily available to do. And that's probably engaging with interested buyers in the middle of the night, for example, or engaging with interested buyers who are going to leave if they don't get an answer to a question within 2 seconds. And it takes you on average, 2 to 3 minutes to respond to a notification or get into that chat. So think, where do you need to be faster than where you actually can as a human? Where do you need to be more available than what you actually can as a human? And where is there work that you're doing repetitively day to day that you're saying, shoot, I'd be a lot more productive if I could get this 20, 30, 40% of my workload off my plate. Those are great areas to inspect as to where you can get some efficiency from AI. We've got a question from Christina. Love the question. She's asking about how some best practices on using Drift. Christina, what I'm going to say is Maggie and I are going to be in our booth for an AMA after this. And I, of course, would love to have that conversation. But I want to keep this away from Drift specifically for the context of this chat. So if you can join us in the booth afterwards, I'd love to get into that and spend as much time as you want. We certainly have some ideas on that.
Yes, I'll take feature requests too, of course.
Totally. So that's great. So I don't know, Maggie, what else based on these questions, like anything you want to tap on while I think of another question for us to get into? Or we have another one coming from the group?
I think the most important thing when thinking about AI in the context of sales is like getting comfortable, like I mentioned, with talking about it, get comfortable with the concepts and know that it's a tool, right? Like it's a tool in our toolkit that we can use to do our jobs more effectively. And it's something that you can use to make yourself more efficient. And I would see it as like a complement to the work that SDRs do, rather than something, that might be a negative. And I think I've seen, at least Kyle, where we've seen the most success is where teams are doing what you said. They use it to do the work that SDRs don't want to do, to allow humans to focus on what we're great at doing. And so I think people are successful when they approach it that way.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I'll also say that, generally if humans aren't able to like intuitively recognize some of these patterns, at least when it comes to conversational AI, it's not going to be great at it either, Yeah. And so like if you like, man, shoot, like, oh, I got this one again and this one again, right? Like that can probably be automated. Yeah. So that's a great way to think about it. David asked the great question, the elephant in the room, which I love these. If there's an elephant in the room, introduce yourself, right? So David's doing that for us. Will AI replace SDRs? Somebody had to ask. So I definitely have some thoughts on this, Maggie, but I want to hear what you think.
I think the answer is no. Will AI change what SDRs do? Probably. But I think I really see it. And again, this is the problem that Kyle and I have been working on. Like, there's all sorts of stuff that we don't need to be spending our time on. Yeah, exactly. I think it'll do lower order work and allow you to do have real conversations with each other or with prospects or with human, that's the part that I think is the new. I mean, I was laughing with Kyle about this before we started. I spent, 3 weeks on the sales team as an AE for a product. And it's hard. It is hard. And building those human connections is so important to sales. And AI is never going to be able to do that, right? So it's just going to do the grunt work for you guys.
Yeah, I think the commercial history of AI and technology in general is fascinating because often technological changes will not replace a job, but will replace tasks within a job. And to speak from my personal experience over the last year, I've helped about 50 organizations with Maggie, set up these kinds of AI experiences specifically to replace tasks that SDRs are doing today. And to my knowledge, not a single one of our customers there has laid off employees after implementing this technology. And quite conversely, several of our customers have seen an increase in productivity per head count that actually makes the motion investable such that they can add more headcount. Like if you have an SDR that's producing, 500K in pipeline per headcount, you need them to be producing 750 for that motion to break even. If you're able to make some technology investments that gets the productivity per headcount of that SDR to $1 million in pipeline, then we can keep hiring them until we see diminishing returns because there's a positive ROI on that investment in additional headcount. And this is clear of like, I was actually reading a book on AI, and they were talking about this in like clothing manufacturing. And like back in the day, everybody made their own clothes, but they were very expensive to make. And you had one pair of everything that you wore everywhere. And then when technology reduced 98% of that workload, the cost of clothing went down so much that the increased demand for it far outweighed the impact, and that the job clothing manufacturing skyrocketed once 98% of the work of making your own clothes went away. And that's why we all have wardrobes full of clothing right now. And so that pattern is played out in technology all over the place, where the increase in efficiency allows you to hire more people often by replacing the tasks that make the motion otherwise unproductive. Get AI, and Aline says, get AI to do laundry, please. So there's your first feature request, Maggie.
Great, I'm on it. Kyle, I had a question.
Yeah.
I had a question for you. So I'm curious, like, what is the biggest surprise that you've had in working with AI, and what AI is able to do that you weren't expecting when you first went on this journey?
Yeah, so the journey describing is one where I started helping with this with little to no AI experience about 2 years ago at Drift, and so everything I've learned about it has been in the context of practicing it with our customers and at Drift. And I think the most surprising thing that I found is that I expect more people to need to deeply understand the technology to invest in it in their companies. And I thought that we'd have to like show people our algorithms, or that we'd have to, get into this deep technical evaluation for someone to buy AI in the business. And what I can say after doing it for some time is that not one person has asked us to unpack the technology at that level. And instead we've spent, for every customer we work with, we spend maybe 20 to 25% of the time talking about the tech and showcasing the solutions, and the rest of the time talking about value realization and the business case. Which is, great, I get the technology. The concept is actually very intuitive for most folks and easy to understand. The question is like, how, for what it costs, how do I justify that investment? What actually changes? And for projects that have these kinds of ramp up times, how do I know along the way that I'm on track to get the kind of value that we've been talking about when we've been building our projections going forward? And so implementation and value realization has been far more important to everybody than the technical components of it. And I didn't expect that going in. It'd be a tech conversation most of the time.
Love that.
Yeah, Susan's mentioned as an analyst, looking at business impact. That's precisely the case. It's always been about business impact. Hello, Maggie. So I'll turn the same question back on you. You and I have been doing this together for some time now. Like, what's been the most interesting observation you've made over the last year as we've been deploying this commercially at Drift?
Yeah, it's actually similar. It's probably just my side of the same coin. I also thought that we would have to do a lot more explaining and showing of the technology itself. But the thing that really surprised me is that it wasn't really about the technology, but it was about how do we help people trust it, especially when there's so much fear and uncertainty and doubt in the market about what the technology is and how it works and what it's capable of. So I remember early as a lot of being surprised by people asking things like, well, did the AI decide to do X, Y, and Z? And I was like, well, the AI can't decide anything. We're training it and we're telling it what to do, and just having to really unwind what I thought about technology and really meet customers where they were with what they were expecting, and to help them understand how it works and what they're going to get out of it, versus, talking about the specific models and things, which I think is similar to you, but just showed up a little bit differently because my job is to make the product, useful to customers. So, yeah.
I love it. And then another question that we and I talked about backstage, and you mentioned, we talked about kind of B2C, being typically ahead of B2B in the commercial adoption and application of AI to drive customer experiences. And you said that you're now looking at kind of the new crazy B2C companies that are out there right now, and what's the new B2C applications of AI, thinking that, some version or corollary of that will show up in B. And in the next, say, 2 to 4 years. So what's the craziest thing or the most interesting thing that you're seeing on the B2C side as it relates to applications of AI that you think, is going to be coming to, a B2B business near you soon?
That's a good question. I think a lot about video. I think a lot about text communication. And I think, again, TikTok is like the shining example that people use when they think about like the future of AI and a pure AI-based business, and the way that they're able to customize a user experience that's like unique to you and unique to what you like, without you having to do anything. And so I think that's, to me, what's magical about those technologies. It's not necessarily that the tech itself is different, but that the experience that they create doesn't require you to do very much, and it's very like behind the scenes and seamless. So I've been thinking a lot about what does that look like for B2B, and how do we make the AI sort of seamless and not as much work, I think, as some deployments are today.
That sounds amazing. I love the example there. Get all the benefit with less work. I think we'll have a lot of fans in the session into that. Susan's asking a great question. She says, what are your customers' greatest gaps / pain points with respect to conversational marketing tools? So I'll give you a crack on this, Maggie, and then.
Yep. Sure. I think it's a good question. I think what's interesting is that, and this is probably true in lots of different functions, but there's a new thing like conversational marketing, new acceleration, and we expect marketers to be able to do that on their own right away and to kind of know how to do it. But, not everyone is going to be an expert in how to craft a conversation, right? How to write out a conversation that's going to be engaging to buyers. That's a new skill set. And so I think the gap is really expecting marketers to know how to do everything out of the gate on their own. I think it's more of an education and helping train people on this new way of interacting with buyers than it is on like a specific gap in the products.
Yeah, I love that. And I think the one that I've noticed is the difference between buyer qualification and vendor qualification. And so I like every company that we work with has a definition of qualification. It might change by sector, it might change by business segment, but they all know like these are the 5 or 6 things that we need to understand about a prospect, before we want to pass them on to the sales organization. Every SDR on the call probably like has it memorized what it is in their business or in their motion. And so we all know how to qualify a buyer, but what we don't realize is that when a buyer shows up to your website, they're trying to qualify you. And they also have 5 or 6 things on their mind that they need to check off or they need to better understand before they want to, give you an email address or commit to a meeting. And what's tricky is that as a business, you have, one set of qualification, but every persona, every buyer, every individual might have 5 or 6 different ideas of what they need to know in order to advance the deal on their side. And so like for a lot of our customers, they will have 5 different product suites, each with 15 discrete products within it and solutions that are configured for 9 different industries. And every one of those industries have 5 different buyer personas. So go ahead and multiply all those numbers. And that's the number of discrete value messages that you need to nail on your website. And so that implies the need for a dynamic way to answer folks' questions. And if you don't answer them, like they're not going to give you anything until they get those questions answered. So I would put a point on it by saying just a rebalancing of who gets qualified first. Basically, the buyer has to qualify you first before they will endure your qualification. And so that's usually where you see kind of the most attrition in conversational marketing deploys, if that answers your question, Susan.
Yep. And I think, Kyle, we're out of time.
I think Renee's presence here is signaling that as well. So I think we're about there.
Yeah, you are. Thank you so much. Super great information. And just to let everyone know, you can go over to the arena, and Drift has a virtual booth there where you can continue this conversation. I think you just go to your homepage and arena is up at the top. So thank you so much, Maggie and Kyle. This was a great session. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us.